I'm Rachel Grimm, and welcome to the podcast With All Your Mind. I'm here to help us understand the Bible with cultural and historical context, linguistic info, and other cool stuff. Enjoy. Hey guys, welcome back. This is Rachel, and this is With All Your Mind, and today we're continuing on with genre. I hope you enjoyed last week with the law, aka the Torah, aka the Pentateuch. And I have a fun fact for you about the Pentateuch. So the Pentateuch, if you didn't listen last week, was the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the fact is that those names are not Hebrew names. You can figure that about the book of Numbers, but the other books, all of them, are not the Hebrew names. Even Leviticus, which you would think has something to do with the Hebrew name Levi, still not a Hebrew name. The Hebrew names for those books are Bereshit, Vayikra, Shemot, Bamidbar, and Devarim. And if you know what I did, I just accidentally switched 2 of them. But they mean in the beginning, the names, he called, in the desert, and the sayings. And that's because in Hebrew, they just named the book after the first word of the book. Not so creative, but to the point. But we got those English names straight from Greek because the early church relied a lot on the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So names like Genesis, Exodus, and Deuteronomy are straight Greek. They're not even messed with. They're just Greek. But today, we are going to talk about prophets and prophecy. The prophets in Hebrew are Nevi'im. That's prophet. Navi, like Navi in Avatar. I don't know if he used that word from Hebrew and then just changed the pronunciation, but I kind of suspect that he did. Navi in Avatar, Navi in Hebrew, Nevi'im is plural, prophets. So that's the N in Tanakh. So Torah is the T. Nevi'im is the prophets. So in the Hebrew Bible, they come next. They come next in the sequence of books, not the historical books or other writings. So when you think of the prophets, who do you think of? I'm curious. Send me a message when you listen to this. Who do you think of as a prophet? I actually think of Samuel and David because they're mentioned as prophets. Samuel is called a seer, which was another word or name for a prophet, someone who sees things, a seer. And those guys were considered prophets, even David. They don't have prophetic books by our standards. Both are in the historical books in our standards in the English Bible. And David has a song book considered poetry. But according to Jews and the Hebrew Bible, they are prophets. So in the Hebrew Bible, after Deuteronomy, there is Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings, which are all considered to be a part of the prophetic group. And then after that comes Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all of the other prophetic books that we know are kind of the typical examples in the Christian Bible. Prophetic books: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, all the ones that you can't think of because they're tucked back in the back of your Bible and you don't really love looking back there and reading them. Yeah, those are the prophets, except for ones like Lamentations and Job. Those are not prophetic books. So what are these prophetic books and how should we read them? This is the point of this episode. First, prophecy and prophesying were pretty major parts of ancient Near Eastern life. They didn't have the Weather Channel or the news, and so to trying to find out what would happen in life, they turned to supernatural sources, such as, there are 2 big ones really, maybe 3. Sacrifice, like you could do sacrifice or burning incense to little altars and little idols in your own home. You could do divination, which was usually done by some kind of spiritual figure, like a priest or a prophet. But then there was also prophecy. So divination, the example, just to differentiate this from prophecy because it's important. Divination is when you would try and use something natural in the natural world to figure out the future. And my mental image for this will always be out of a mini series that Ryan and I watched probably like 15 years ago now. It's called Masada, and it's about Masada. It's a good name. And it's, if you don't know what Masada is about, that was Herod's fortress, palace, kind of desert oasis palace in the Judean desert down below Jerusalem by the Dead Sea. And I've been there a couple of times, and you can see the Dead Sea from it. You're up on a kind of like a mesa, and it's really hard to get to. The hike is straight up the side. It does a zigzag, switchback kind of thing. But anyway, so this mini series is about the story of the people that lived at Masada for about 2-ish years after Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. A group of people ran away to Masada, hoping to be the holdouts, hoping to be the survivors that did not have to surrender to the Romans. And there's a scene in this miniseries, and it's from the 80s. It kind of feels like Ben-Hur type stuff, even though it's from the 80s. And it has Peter O'Toole, and it has a few famous people. And there's one scene where the Romans are trying to figure out if they should attack or not, and they bring a priest over, and they're like, do your thing. And he cuts open a goat and pulls out the liver and proclaims something. I don't remember what he said, but either, oh, it's a great day, or doesn't look good. And that is divination. It is usually using some kind of animal piece or bodily fluid to figure out the future and try and make decisions based on how something looks. And I think it's just like the liver, it's kind of like tea leaves and I don't know what other, tarot cards. Those are all examples of divination. So if you're using an animal thing and trying to figure out the future from it, divination. Prophecy, on the other hand, was getting messages from the gods about events and the future to know what decisions to make and how to appease the gods. So a big point I should make is that God had very specific ways that he told his people, you can do it this way and you can do it that way, but you are not allowed to do it this other way. For example, sacrifices and incense were only supposed to be done at the temple in certain ways, according to God's laws. Not in your home, not on a hill, not under a tree. You do it my way, in my place. Divination, out of the question. The only thing that comes remotely close was lots, which was kind of like rolling dice or pulling straws. It was letting God decide without trying to force the opinion by looking at a liver and figuring it out yourself. And then the last piece, prophecy, we see the prophets in the story with Ahab and Micaiah, and also Balaam and Balak, where false prophets were getting quote-unquote prophecies from their gods, but they were basically making them up. It sounds like they're making up. We don't know beyond that. But prophecy was a sanctioned way to get a message from God, but it was a message from God. It wasn't somebody coming up with a message from God or figuring out a message from God. It was from God, and it was delivered to the people. And much of the time, prophecy in biblical books is warnings from God to repent and return to him. It's a correction. And other prophecy was giving people hope about the future with messages about things like the Messiah and what he would do. But prophecy, here's the point, prophecy in the Bible was not weird. It was highly anticipated and special, but not weird. It was culturally appropriate. God was using the things that the people were familiar with in ways that he sanctioned. He was still in control of it, but he used methodology that the people were familiar with. It wasn't straight out of a sci-fi movie or something. Now let's talk about features of prophecy. There is lots of symbolism in prophecy, and that's because the ancient Near East liked to make use of symbols. Our modern eyes like to find beauty, and when they find 7 horns or 10 eyes, it sounds grotesque because it's not beautiful, and we forget to instead read and look for symbolism according to ancient cultural standards. There is a modern science called semiotics. There you go. Semiotics. And it's the study of signs. And it gets really deep, really deep into it. I remember doing semiotics in, I feel like I'm messing that word up. Don't quote me on that. I'll put it in the show notes. As a part of my humanities master's, and it just got so deep and dense so fast. But basically, in the modern world, we use a lot of literary symbolism, and that means like just visuals, but with alphabets, with words, with letters. We use a lot of that with our symbolism because the written language is so widespread. In the ancient Near East, writing was not that widespread. You needed a really skilled person and a lot of time to carve something into stone to make it last in any kind of public space. And in a private space, you had to put it onto specially prepared fine leather with special ink. Oh, it's just a super long process. We have podcast episodes about that. And it was a special deal. It was not a widespread deal because it was so hard. Not because not everybody could read, but that was the case too. Literacy was just not as common. So instead of using writing for a lot of their symbolism, they used the natural world, animals, and physical geographical features, mountains and lakes and rivers and things like that. So the things that they used for their symbolism in their prophecy, or what God used in his symbolism for his prophecy, was the natural world, animals, people, buildings, and geographical features. It's just different symbolism. So we just need to remember that these are not weird things to them. They are weird things to us because we don't use the same symbols. So one book that contains prophecy that I was struck by reading the other day is Daniel. Daniel is the guy that figures out the meaning of a prophecy from God. He was reading his Bible and he thought, you know what? This prophecy says that after 70 years, the people of Israel should be going back to Jerusalem. I think that means now. And he realized he had lived until the day that God would restore his people to their land from the land of Babylon, and that the exile should be over. And I really liked Daniel's response to this. He prays. He confesses his and his people's sins and asks God to fulfill the prophecy. Now, he asks God to fulfill the prophecy. He doesn't demand anything. He doesn't run around to prophecy rallies and try to get everybody riled up and excited for the prophecy that he has because he's the one that realized it and blah, 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 blah. He stays humble and he simply asks God to do what he has promised to do. I just thought that was such a good example for us for what to do if we think there is a prophecy that we understand, and a good way to read prophetic books. Just an open mind to see what God is saying, not how we interpret it. So if you think you know what a prophecy means, pray and ask God to do it. Okay, that's all I have for prophecy. Up next, we're going to do the writings. That is a really fun one, and I hope you'll be back. So it's a giant grab bag of things, and we're going to talk about all of it. I really look forward to it. All right, you guys have a good one, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye.